Big Nebraska rivalry in the women's section in this one. November, we got a great matchup. We got Nebraska and Creighton. It's going to be taken on in Omaha. It's always a good matchup when we see these two teams take off, and this time we get to see it as two ranked opponents. Hello, everyone. Welcome to SlasherU. I'm your host, Christian Rao, here with my co-host, Steve Feck. And Steve, this is a really good matchup. We see Nebraska take on Creighton. I watched in depth that Creighton South Dakota State game. This is the second time Creighton's going to take on another ranked opponent. This is the second ranked on ranked game for them. They looked really good on the road against South Dakota State. Now they get to host Nebraska in a pretty big rivalry game. It's going to be a really good matchup.
It is going to rain threes.
Yes,
at Sokol Arena. I mean, Creighton. That's their bread and butter. Now they can drive the lane and they can shoot off the dribble, but hitting the threes, if they're in their rhythm, they can beat just about anybody. Over the last 5 years, over last year, did Creighton lose to Nebraska? Prior to that, the margin of victory was like 2.5 points, and it was all 3-pointers. So far this year, Creighton has already hit 35 3-pointers up to this point. And it's, Laura Jensen, you talked about the South Dakota State game. South Dakota State is a good team. I mean, because they were ranked early.
They'll be ranked again.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, and she just lit them up for 30. Mm-hmm. And it was like an easy 30. Like, it wasn't like, you had to fight. It just was, when you watch that game, it's like, oh, she only had 30. It seems like she had 60. I mean, literally, that's how well that she played. And if Creighton can consistently hit those threes and get some easy layups, off the dribble, catching Nebraska a little bit, off guard because they're trying to push the perimeter too much. This could be another long night for Nebraska against Creighton. Nebraska is good. Markowski is a physical player. She's got a nice touch. They have the two Australian ladies, Jazz Shelley and Bourne. I think her first name is Isabel. I think it's Isabel Bourne. They played for the under-18 Australian national team. So Nebraska's got players that could do it. They just don't have anybody that can shoot like the majority of the Creighton team can shoot. Yeah. So if those three Creighton top scorers can drain those threes, it's going to be a long night.
The crazy thing about the Creighton Blue Jays women's squad so far is that they've looked very good in their first two matchups. And obviously we saw them with the ranked on ranked matchup to start the season. They're one of their scorers that they've relied on, and you could even call they're one of their best players, Emma Ronziak, has not took off yet. And she's the only, we'd have to expect that it's going to happen sooner or later, but in her two games, she's had 6 points against South Dakota State, and then against South Dakota, she had 4 points. And you have to think, some people might see that as a concern. The fact that they're still winning the games shows that it's not a concern. They're finding other ways to win the game. But if she gets going as well, on top of Jensen, on top of Malley, this is going to be a really good matchup and a really good win for Creighton. That's where my prediction's going. I think the Blue Jays are going to win this one against Nebraska. It's going to be a close one, though. I think we are going to see a really close one. I hate to see whoever loses this one fall out of the top 25. I just don't feel like this early in the season, if you lose to a top 25 team, you should fall out. I'm just not. This is just too early, especially because half of the teams that are in the top 25 are playing cupcake squads. If you have the tenacity to play a top 25 team this early in the season and you fall and it's not a blowout, you shouldn't fall out.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because schools in the Midwest place more value on the in-state and regional rivalries than schools in other parts of the nation. Now, of course, we're going to see South Carolina, Stanford, big game, Tennessee and Indiana, UConn and Texas. I mean, you've got ranked teams playing each other, but as as a rule, you have much easier games early on, except for some of those elite programs. So, and in the Midwest, most of these players are coming from Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, Illinois, even, so they're only a couple hundred miles away from home. So, so I think that helps boost the energy in the buildings where families can come and root, for their daughters,
Yeah.
In places that they've been to a bunch of times, because a lot of the high school tournaments in Nebraska are played at Sokol Arena. So it's a really different dynamic for schools in the Midwest. And I think that they're always having to dig themselves out of a hole because they are playing so many good teams early, not necessarily by choice because they want to play a ranked team. It's because of tradition. And I think the culture of women's basketball in the Midwest is much different than on the two coasts. I think on the two coasts, it's more the individual players and maybe where they are in the arc at any given time. But in the Midwest, it's down in those little small gyms and driving through the snow to get to a weekend game or whatever. So, hats off. We had Drake in Iowa. Another really good, intense rivalry. There's a lot of regional rivalries that are going to be played between now and conference play starts. So I don't have a hat, but if I did, tip of the hat, ladies. For those programs in the Midwest, you do uphold the rivalry tradition. You're not as concerned about conference play. You want to play against the schools and against the other players that you've played with coming up through the elementary and high school ranks and the club teams. So I think it's really important to keep an eye on that. Just because the team's ranked in the 20s, it doesn't mean that they're not a really, really good team, but their record might not reflect come March really how talented those teams are.
Very fair point. The slate on Tuesday night is absolutely loaded, but I definitely recommend you give this one a viewing. It's at 7:00 Eastern time. Again, number 22 Nebraska taking on number 20 Creighton. The battle in Omaha, the rivalry of Nebraska. This is going to be a very good matchup, and you should tune in.